for what we have and knowing that we are here for a purpose. On that note, I am so thankful to bring over Salih Hudayar. He is the Prime Minister of East Turkestan. And I am just so honored to have you back here. We have so much to talk about. I'm thankful for what you are doing. I saw that you were at the Department of State yesterday. I saw that you were talking about specific things about 44 of those who died and what happened with the COVID lockdowns. I would love to break it down for first and foremost, talk about what you are doing, and then let's talk about the news of the day, the international news of the day, and what is ahead for the United States government with what is happening in China.
Yes, yesterday we held a rally in front of the U.S. State Department to protest China's the Chinese government's killing, we could say, in a way, in the fact that 44 Uyghurs died in a Urumqi fire because the Chinese government didn't get there in time to put out the fire. It took them 3 hours to respond, leading to up to 44, possibly even more deaths. This in turn sparked demonstrations all across China because the Chinese people themselves, they didn't want to end up like the Uyghurs. They didn't want to end up, dead if the Chinese Communist Party continued to lock them up. So in fact, the demonstrations are still continuing as of today. However, as far as the U.S. government's response, the U.S. government hasn't stated anything other than that they are monitoring the situation and they, support the right of people to engage in peaceful protest. We also were there to call on the U.S. government to take strong and more meaningful actions to help end China's ongoing genocide of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan. Specifically to support our case against China at the International Criminal Court, recognize East Turkestan's status as an occupied country like Tibet, and appoint a special coordinator at the State Department for East Turkestani issues.
Some of the things I've been watching. So I watched your rally in front of the State Department yesterday, and first and foremost, what was the response you received in that time period of being there and you speaking? And you had quite a crowd around you. What kind of a feeling did you get? Did anybody at State Department respond to you? Did anybody ask you to leave the premises? Did anybody make any kind of action from the federal government in regards to what you guys are doing?
No, we've never had any issues with the U.S. government trying to tell us to leave or stop protesting. We've never had any issues of that sort. Sometimes it really depends. Usually they send out the person responsible for China to come out and speak with us and get any material. Unfortunately, yesterday that did not happen because there was also quite a bit of media out there. So I guess they didn't want to get into that spotlight.
Right. Well, let's talk about this. So the United States government, are they holding back on keeping the CCP accountable is my first, question. And here's why I'm asking you that in your perspective of that. We are watching what happened to these people as they were blockaded. The walls were put up and the emergency services cannot get to these people. So you have this lockdown policy of COVID. And I've noticed that there are conservative groups who I'm very in support of who are saying, the citizens of China are standing up to communism. Are we as Americans doing the same thing? Are we standing up to these lockdowns that I call the Biden administration seeks to continue to potentially put on us, especially as we head into the winter? And they're talking about all the COVID, the triple effect and things of that nature. So let me ask you this. I'm citing Family Research Council and I'm citing the Daily Signal. A lot of them are really talking about that this morning. From the standpoint, is the United States government going along with the CCP? Or can we say that those citizens of China are wanting to become, believe in democracy as what the Daily Signal posted this morning in their article. They really talked about how the citizens of China really want to have a democracy and not be under the totalitarian government. So my question to you is, from your work and what you were doing, what can we as Americans continue to do and raise our voices to protect us from going down that CCP space? And, I sit there and say, I can say this on my show. I'm going to rant here for a second. I don't see the federal government, the United States government, doing much of anything except when they go on their press conferences and say, oh, peaceful protest. And they say that all over the country. But yet Christians like myself and others are being censored when we want to stand up for our rights. So I guess my question to you is, in all of that, you are living this day in and day out as you are representing. What are your thoughts that we can, as the American citizens, say to the American government, stop what is happening over there? We got to protect these lives. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's going to be a bit difficult to get the U.S. government to take, meaningful action, especially sadly with this administration. They seem to be taking a more weaker approach on China. Had it been a Republican administration, we probably might have seen stronger actions already. Um, uh, at this rate, I don't really see the U.S. doing much. But they need to, offer support. They need to at least, if things change to where the Chinese government or the CCP starts gunning down people, the United States needs to make it very clear that they are no longer going to tolerate such a regime. And if there's a repeat of Tiananmen, 1989,
Right.
the States needs to make it very clear, break all diplomatic ties with China. And
Right.
all democratic nations need to do that, or else we will have, endorsed that the, the
Yeah.
massacre of people. And this is, if China gets away with it, you bet other countries are going to want, other despotic regimes are want to do the same thing to their people.
Let me
So,
ask you this for just a thought for a second. As we head into a new year and we have a Republican House, a majority Republican House, even though we have a current Democrat, president in the Oval Office, do you have advocates who are congressional elected, newly elected members, or do you have current members of Congress who are running alongside of you to really protect these lives?
yeah, there are many people in Congress, like Senator Rubio,
Mhm.
Congressman Chris Smith. I think on terms of our issue, it's quite actually bipartisan. Luckily, in terms of speaking out for the human rights and against the genocide, but that's not going to be enough. We need to resolve the issue at its roots, which is this is more of a political issue as well. The fact that this genocide and colonization started with the Chinese occupation of East Turkestan in late 1949. And until we address that, there's not going to be any meaningful change for the Uyghurs. And
Mhm.
that's why we've been actively pushing for recognition of East Turkestan's status as an occupied country like Tibet. And we've been, receiving more, sympathy and solidarity in terms of that from the Republicans than, sadly, from the Democrats.
That is unfortunate because the Democrat Party usually goes more on the social agenda, social justice agenda. And the fact that here on Common Sense America, you just stated, and I am reiterating, that the Democrats have been very lackluster and involved in wanting to protect these lives of the Uyghurs. And that's uncalled for. That really is. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring up to you as well. That there's a couple statements that stood out to me as I read the press release that was put out. The deliberate failure to put out the fire, first and foremost, the censorship of the deaths, and the COVID lockdowns for further genocide. Talk to me about all of those things. There's so many different action items that the Chinese government is doing to these humans. These
Yes.
humans.
For example, this fire broke out
Yes.
in a Uyghur part of town, in a Uyghur building, and the government, they chained up, they sealed all the exits of that building to where people couldn't get out. They even had barricades across that building, walls put up to where people can't get out.
Why did they do that though? What was the reasoning other than they just wanted to lock people up? Was that
I
the main
mean,
reason?
that's the official reasoning, is that they were trying to maintain zero COVID policies. And then the other excuse is that, their fire trucks couldn't get through.
Yeah, I saw that.
So,
Yeah.
their hoses weren't long enough, and they didn't have proper equipment to rescue the people. How do they not have proper equipment? You have saws, you have axes. You could have sawed off those locks, sawed off those, you know, rods that you had put up in place to prevent people from leaving, and try to get them out.
Hmm.
You could have had a tarp to where people could jump out of their windows and you catch them. But of course, none of that happened, and it took 3 hours for them to even start getting there, because uh, unfortunately, because the people were Uyghur and majority of the firefighters were Chinese and the security forces were Chinese. Uh, they, because of the Chinese government's racist, discriminatory views of the Uyghurs, even their security and police forces, have the same perception. So they're like, oh, so what if it's Uyghurs? Like, we really shouldn't care. And even after these deaths, the Chinese government censored it to where they're like, oh, only 10 people died, and
Hmm.
then they started removing posts stating otherwise. They started arresting people who started, posting about these issues,
Hmm.
the fire, and in other cases, if there, I've seen other cases like, even if it had been the Han Chinese who had been affected by this,
Right.
there would have been a national memorial. They would have had a day of mourning or something of that sort. But because these are ethnically Uyghur, no such thing. While the Han Chinese were able to come out and protest, because fearing for their lives, they're like, oh crap, Uyghurs just got killed. The same thing could happen to us if they keep
Right.
this COVID lockdowns up. In terms of Uyghurs, we weren't able to even go out into the streets, yet alone even hold to protest, yet alone to even hold a memorial for our people, for the dead.
So let me ask you this. The local, I looked at the press release and it said local authorities installed those barricades and bolted the doors. Who do you classify as the local authorities? Because when I sit here and look at, America, and sitting here looking at North Carolina, you have your local board members, your local commissioners, your local mayors. What was the equivalent to that over there? Who was the quote local people, authorities taking these actions, and you seeing at the light at the end of the tunnel that they were intending to kill these people? I'm speaking for you, but correct me if I'm wrong. That's how it looks. They continue to kill these people, and then my next question to you after the local piece is this: are we going to continue to see more demonstrations of Chinese people standing up to communism? And are they going to lock them up as well?
Well, in terms of the first question,
Yeah.
so local in this sense is the city of Urumqi,
Okay.
um, or the municipality of Urumqi. So uh, Urumqi predominantly is a Chinese city now. It wasn't always like this.
Okay.
Prior to 1949, it was predominantly Uyghur, but after intensive Chinese occupation and colonization, it has shifted. Everything, however, is controlled by the Communist Party, by the
Hmm.
central government. Whatever orders that comes from Beijing,
Yeah.
the local governments implement.
Hmm.
And Urumqi is also the seat of the so-called autonomous region. It's where the puppet governors and the Chinese Communist Secretary reside, along with all the other top level communist officials.
Hmm.
So it's them who gave the orders. Um, so local in the sense that Beijing's Communist Party appointees in the region gave the orders.
Hmm.
As far as the demonstrations, it seems at this moment that demonstrations are continuing. The Chinese government surprisingly has been very not necessarily restrained, but very careful in terms of not being overtly violent yet.
What do you
Uh,
think that is?
well, I think it's because I think certain segments of the Chinese government are fed up with Xi Jinping,
Okay.
and so they are, if not supporting it, tacitly allowing it to happen by, restraining, trying to restrain a brutal response.
Hmm.
And I think this is the fact that, especially in Shanghai, like where
Hmm.
protesters called for Xi Jinping to step down. You
Hmm.
have to understand that Shanghai is where
I've
it's
been there. I've been
China's
there.
financial center. One.
Yes. Hmm.
Secondly, it's where the Jiang faction of the Chinese Communist Party,
Hmm.
which oppose Xi Jinping,
Hmm.
are in power. So they control the Shanghai area,
Hmm.
and they oppose Xi Jinping. So the fact that they allowed, even these, take down the CCP, take down, Xi Jinping. We don't want a dictator. Is a direct message from the opposing faction to Beijing saying, you know, we don't like your policies, because the for the past 120 days, these
Right.
lockdowns have had tremendous economic impacts,
Oh,
negative economic impacts
I know.
to, the Chinese economy, to many Chinese companies. Many people have lost their businesses. And the elites in Shanghai, like the business capital of China, many of them went out of business. They're losing a lot, so they are tired and fed up. And I think this is their way of telling Xi Jinping, either step down or we're going to keep this up.
Well, let me ask you this. Watching coups happen in the United States federal government, do you think they'd be doing that against the Chinese president right now? Do you think that is in the works, in the coming months? And a second question to that, do you think we're going to see more deaths happen because of the lockdown? You mentioned the loss of businesses, but do you think you're going to see more intentional deaths ahead, and where you are trying to be proactive to prevent those?
Yes, I think especially in if we don't see it inside the Chinese provinces themselves, we will
Mhm.
definitely see that in East Turkestan, because the Chinese government, especially the Chinese military, will use this to, the global attention that's happening across the demonstrations across China, to use this to mask their, to mask their ethnic cleansing operations in East Turkestan. Already, they are, sending people in mass to new concentration camps. Even here in the winter, there's videos, are people being, rounded up in the snow and being thrown into tent-like concentration camps, and you know. Being essentially left to, freeze in those tents. And of course, the Chinese government is going to come out and say, "Oh, uh, it, it's tragic that these people died. We were just trying to, you know, quarantine them, etc., etc." If it even gets into the news, because this is the way that, genocidal regimes operate.
Well, let me ask you this. If it gets into the news, have you, knowing that you have a phenomenal publicist, and I know that you've been on the front lines really talking about this, have you been able to get good news coverage in talking about this and raising the awareness, talking the truth versus what some types of media would not necessarily highlight?
Well, with most of the conservative media,
Yeah.
they're more open to
Talking.
hearing everything, to
Yeah.
hearing, the truth. Unfortunately, occasionally we do have luck with the left-wing media, but they're a bit more, or the liberal media, and they're a bit more, uh, self-censored about certain things. For example, uh, yesterday,
Yeah.
I advocate for East Turkestani independence, but the left wing or the liberal media, like
Yeah.
AFP, you
Uh-huh.
know, wrote that I advocate for Xinjiang independence. These two things are completely opposite. East Turkestan is the name of our country, whereas Xinjiang is the Chinese colonial imposed term meaning the colony or the new territory. I don't advocate for a colony or a new territory's independence. I advocate for my own country,
Right.
for
Right.
my own people.
Perhaps so, two things that come to mind. Perhaps they didn't get it quite right because they weren't educated well enough on it and they just had to throw something together, or they are trying to mislead the content and what you are doing, trying to mislead the narrative of what is truly happening, which is why we have you here at Common Sense America to really focus on truth, to talk about the truth, because the audience here is very conservative. They are those of faith. They are those who are willing to fight for human life. And, you bring that to the table. And let me ask you one final question as we wrap this segment, because I want to get you back. And I have been watching this story very closely, and I noticed it hit over Thanksgiving. My question to you is, what next do you have on the forefront where my audience can come alongside of you and support you? Do you have any more press conferences coming up? Do you have any more events coming up? Where also can they follow you? I saw that you are on a ton of different social media places. And also I have been posting your website where they can go and check you out more. So quickly, what do you have coming down the pike that we can be supportive of?
Well, right now, so November 22nd, we will have a press conference and a rally as well, to commemorate or to condemn the 73rd
Right.
anniversary of the overthrow of our independent state, the East Turkestan Republic, back in
Mhm.
1949. Um, After that, we're also pushing for legislation, as we have been. Hopefully, now that it's a majority, it's a Republican majority, we're hoping to get a new legislation, at least a resolution passed, recognizing the fact that East Turkestan is an occupied country. People can follow us on social media, either myself directly at SalihHudayar, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, or other social media platforms, or our government in exile at ETExile.gov on, again, Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms.
Well, I'm thankful for you coming to the show, Salih Hudayar. You are an extraordinary human being. You were the Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile. And one thing I will say is, for all of those who are tuning in here at Common Sense America, you struck some very hardcore topics that we as the American people need to be aware of, as the constant COVID conversation continues to make the news headlines, and what is next. And you brought up a really very valid point of loss of businesses, loss of lives with the lockdown policy of China, and a lesson to be learned and a lesson to be watched for the American people as we head into the winter season. And so I'm grateful for you bringing that truth to the table. And we would love to have you come back as you are working on legislation and amendments with the new leaders in Congress. Please come back. Let's talk about that. Let's break it down. And many blessings to you this holiday season. Thank you.